Chapter 22 Thunder. Aidan was drifting into a pleasant reverie of the Cornwall of old when he heard a strange sort of music from the Perthyn line behind him. Three twangs, pitched a little lower than the low string on a lute. Twang, twa, twang. So rapid as to be nearly simultaneously. Black-feathered arrows whistled past, one just inches from his left ear, one over his head. A third arrow grazed his right arm just below the shoulder. He instinctively dropped to the ground. Four more twangs, four black-feathered arrows sailed over him, right where he had stood a second earlier. He quickly took cover behind the ironclad hulk of Gridle's lifeless body. The strange music, he realized, was the twang of Perthyn bowstrings. Aidan crouched as low as he could. Arrows continued to whistle just over his head or deflect off the iron plates of Gridle's armor. Then a hail of blue-feathered arrows came flying over from the Cornwalder side of the valley. On the Perthyn side, 5 archers fell. The battle was on. Before Aidan knew what was happening, foot soldiers from both sides were spilling into the valley and charging toward one another. The armies collided in 2 long lines down the middle of the valley, and Aidan found himself in the midst of ferocious fighting. Lacking either arms or armor, Aidan thought it best to lie low. His arm was streaked with the blood trickling from the wound left by the grazing arrow. He improved his defense position behind Guido's bulk by pulling the huge shield over himself, making an iron lean to where he was hidden and a little safer. He realized there was little he could do but wait it out. The hacking and jabbing were terrible to see, the pounding of swords and axes on shields, the screams and groans of wounded men were awful to hear. A hand grabbed the edge of the iron shield and flipped it over. His covering was gone. Aidan was exposed, invulnerable as a cockroach when a boy turns over a log. He almost wept with relief and gratitude when he realized it wasn't a Perthyn who had uncovered him, but his brother Brennus. "Now look what you've done," said Brennus with a mock sternness. He was smiling. "You've saved Cornwall, that's what." He motioned to Percy, Jasper, and Maynard, who were also searching for their little brother among the chaos of the battle. They formed a guard around Brennus and Aidan. "You're bleeding," said Brennus. "How bad is it?" "Not bad at all," Aidan assured him. "But still, I wouldn't mind getting out of here." "You'll be back in the camp in no time." Maynard, Jasper, and Percy formed a rear guard. Brennus put a protective arm around Aidan, and they made for the Cornwalder camp. As they ran, Brennus leaned in toward Aidan's ear and said something that astonished his little brother. "Hail to the Wilder King." Though Aidan insisted he was fine, the brothers deposited him at the surgeon's tent to have his wound treated. Then they returned to the battle. The surgeon, an old man with a white mustache and wet blue eyes, dabbed at Aidan's bloodied arm. "Just a flesh wound," he observed, "not much more than a nick." He reached for a jar of turpentine gum. "This is going to burn a bit," he warned, "but it will seal you up nicely and keep the termites out." He laughed at his own joke. "There," he said, as he coated the wound, "good as new." The surgeon was wrapping Aidan's arm with cotton strips when he noticed the Fichi mark on his forearm. "What happened there?" he asked. "That?" answered Aidan, a little startled. That's a. He decided we'd better not to get specific. "That's a burn scar." "It almost looks like an alligator," the surgeon remarked. "Look, there's the mouth. There's the tail curving around." A look of remembrance lit the old surgeon's face. "I once saw a scar like this, one on the forearm of a man I was treating." Aidan's eyes grew wide. The man the surgeon spoke of must have been a Fichi friend. "Who was it?" he asked. "Oh, heavens! I couldn't possibly remember. It must have been 40 years ago. I was still a surgeon's apprentice." He smiled wistfully to think about those days. "And besides, it was in the middle of a very hot battle." "I've forgotten the man, if indeed I ever knew him, but a scar like that is hard to forget." The din of battle resounded outside the surgeon's tent. "But there are Cornwalders lying hurt on the field even now. I must go to them." He began making preparations to leave. "You've made us all proud to be Cornwalders, young Errolson," the old man said. Aidan smiled at him. "Cornwalders free and true." "Here, here," the surgeon answered. "I'll leave you here to rest. You need it. Just stay here and I'll be back to check on you when I can. He gathered up the last few things into his surgeon's bag and left for the battlefield. Aidan lay back on his cot and wondered for a minute about the mysterious Fiji friend that the old man had met so many years before. But only for a minute. Aidan had no intention of lying in a tent while his brothers and countrymen battled an invading army. The camp was more or less deserted, so he walked to the armory and helped himself to a small sword and buckler. Then he hurried out to the battle, sword raised, mouth stretched with a primal shout of exuberance. By the time Aidan got to the battle valley, his countrymen had pushed the skirmish line all the way back to the slope, leading up to the Perthan camp. At last, thought Aidan, they look like the mighty men of Cornwall, riding fast and striking hard in defense of their island. But it is no easy matter to fight uphill, even for men who, like the Cornwallers, had just rediscovered strength they forgot they had. Fighting downhill, the Perthans, with their superior numbers, were able to hold their line at the edge of the encampment. They dug in, and the Cornwallers were unable to get the momentum to push up out of the valley floor and overrun them. The Cornwalder line was stretching thin. By the time Aidan caught up to the rear guard, King Darrow realized that his army had to fall back and regroup before it could take the Perthan camp. The retreat flags went up, and the Cornwallers began to withdraw eastward toward their own encampment. The Perthans didn't pursue. They had had all they wanted of the Cornwallers that day. They seemed content to lick their wounds and wait for the next day's fighting. Aidan had fallen in with a cluster of soldiers from the Tambluff regiment when a crack of thunder split the air above him, striking the earth about 50 strides ahead of him. The thunderbolt sent earth and men flying through the air. Aidan looked to the sky. It was cloudless. Another clap of thunder was followed by another shower of earth. A third flattened two tents in the Cornwalder camp. Behind him from the Perthan camp, Aidan heard taunting cheers. He turned to see what was happening, and through a film of white smoke he could see that the Perthan foot soldiers had withdrawn from the valley's edge to make way for three heavy carriages. Laid across each carriage was a huge tube of black iron, as big around as a saw log, and almost as long, pointed toward the Cornwalders. A cluster of Perthans worked busily around the near end of each tube, though Aidan couldn't see what they were doing. Then one of the soldiers poked what appeared to be a mop into the tube and jabbed it around a few times, and a soldier with an officer's plume touched the other end of the tube with a lit pine knot. Then the thunder came again. A flash of white fire shot out of the tube's open end, and a high whistle soared over Aidan's head. And behind him, nearly at the Cornwalder's edge of the valley, came the earth-shattering crash and the screams of men thrown skyward by the impact. The Perthans, Aidan realized, had figured out how to make thunder in those iron tubes, and mule teams were pulling three more into position. Aidan joined the throng that was now running panic-stricken from the enemy they were so thoroughly defeating only a half-hour before. The camp offered little protection. The Perthans could easily throw thunder clear across the valley. The only good news was that the Perthans, though they knew how to make thunder, weren't very good at making it go where they wanted. The great majority of thunderbolts landed in the valley short of the Cornwalder camp, or in open plain beyond. Nevertheless, the camp was in an uproar. The thunderbolts they did find their way into the camp did considerable damage, and the shaking of the earth and the deafening noise shattered the Cornwalders' nerves. By now, they could barely see the Perthans for the curtain of white smoke that issued from the thunder tubes. They mostly saw the bright flash of the thunder fire, the sweet, acrid smoke carried across the valley by a westerly breeze burned their eyes and noses. In the confusion, Aidan was unable to find his brother's tent, so he picked his way through his thunderstruck countrymen to the command yard. That was, after all, where his tent was. The guards recognized him and saluted as he passed their checkpoint. Inside the command yard, King Darrow and a half-dozen noblemen were circled around a crater where one of the thunderbolts had come to earth. Lord Grady was tapping his walking stick on something smooth and metallic at the bottom of the crater. It was the top half of a big iron ball, a little smaller than a cantaloupe. "It's not thunderbolts they're throwing at us," Lord Grady observed. "It's these iron balls." Another deafening explosion shook the earth not 20 strides away. "They might as well be thunderbolts," Solon remarked grimly, "for all our ability to defend against them." "Oh, the fiendish imagination of the Perthans," groaned Lord Radnor. to rain destruction from half a league away. King Darrow had been deep in thought this whole time, pondering his options, racking his brain for a plan that would get them out of this predicament. Now he spoke. That's enough poor mouthing. We haven't come here to lose this battle. The one God is with us. He looked at Aiden. Young Errolson showed us that. If we despair, our men will despair, and Cornwall will be lost. Another thunderbolt whistled overhead and flattened a tent 4 rows over. We mustn't despair, the king repeated, more to himself than anyone else. Just then 2 soldiers approached. One wore an officer's uniform. The second was an older foot soldier, too old really to be a foot soldier, who had the earthy, sunburned look of a farmer. They both saluted King Darrow. Your Majesty, began the officer, I'm Captain Perrin of the Blue Moss Regiment. This is Harlan Ebson, one of the soldiers under my command. He has information you may find useful. The king addressed the soldier. Speak, Harlan. Your king listens. The soldier removed his helmet to address the king, but when the earth shook again with the impact of distant thunderbolt, he thought better of it and put it back on with a sheepish nod to Darrow. Your Majesty, he began in a slow drawl of the Middle Shires, when I was a boy, my family farmed this land. Our house stood hard by that big live oak where the giant stands. He caught himself and nodded toward Aiden. Used to stand to taunt us every day. House is gone now. Perthens burned it to the ground in the first invasion, and we may moved away to Blue Moss. Another Perthen thunderball shattered the air. When the noise subsided, Harlan continued. About 50 strides beyond that oak tree, there's an underground cave, just a hole in the ground. We stored cheese and eggs and smoked meat there in the coolness. Mid the chaos of battle, the old farmer's slow, meandering way of telling the story was maddening. The nobleman grew fidgety. Harlan pointed north. And up this way, about half hour's walk, there's another cave. Solon spoke impatiently. Enough preliminaries. What's your information? Harlan blinked at the nobleman, then blinked again. Well, sir, he drawled, that was the information. The captain broke in to explain. The point is, the 2 caves might connect underground like a secret passway. King Darrow was starting to get the idea, so he might be able to send a troop of soldiers into the very heart of the enemy camp. Right, answered the captain, visibly excited by the prospect. And who knows what havoc they could wreak, added Radnor. The captain nodded his head eagerly. That's what I was thinking. Perhaps they could capture the Perthen thunder tubes, suggested Lord Halberd. If they were part of a larger assault, maybe so, the king remarked. He spoke to Harlan. So what are the chances these 2 caves connect? Oh, I'd say there's a pretty decent chance, answered the farmer soldier. The growing excitement among the noblemen was palpable. But that ain't the problem, he added. Not the problem? Huffed Lord Solwyn. Then what do you suppose is the problem? Problem's finding the way. When that limestone melts away to make a cave, it can leave a maze of tunnels and twisting pathways about like an ant bed. This news dampened the group's spirit. Harlan went on. Then there's a good chance the path you're looking for is underwater. Cousin of mine drowned in a cave like that. He paused a few seconds out of respect for his cousin. And dark, he continued. Man, you've never seen such darkness, so such thing as daytime in a cave. He shivered to think of this last expedition underground, more than 30 years earlier before the first Western invasion. Low ceilings, tight squeezes, sore back, bruised knees. I don't ever want to go in a cave again. King Darrow and his advisors were dejected now. Their hopes of finding a secret tunnel to the Perthens were all but crushed. But then again, Harlan added cheerfully, you might get down there and find us a straight shot from here to there. You never know in a cave. So, to summarize, sighed Solon, there's a chance that there's an underground path from our side of the valley to the Perthen camp. There's a chance it is underwater. There's a chance this path won't have places too narrow for armed soldiers to pass through. There's a chance we'll be able to find this path, and there's a chance that if a troop of soldiers actually made to the Perthen camp, they'd be able to do us any good. Harlan nodded. Sounds about right. That adds up to a very slim chance this scheme could work, moaned Selwyn. True, answered King Dar, but these are desperate times. We must try it. He began pacing back and forth, thinking how best to make this happen. There's no point in sending a troop of armed soldiers and hoping they find their way, he began. We'll send a team of scouts to explore the caves and mark a path, if there is one for the soldiers to follow. How about miners? Aiden suggested. A regular scout's skill and training won't do them much good underground, but miners spend their day inside the earth. The boy's right, agreed Lord Grady. The mines of Greasy Cave are in my shire. Shall we send for some Greasy Cave boys? Yes, answered the king. Grady, go to the captain of the regiment. Tell him to muster a team of 5 experienced miners for a special mission, a mission that might save their kingdom. Then the king added under his breath, an all important, near impossible mission. Aiden broke the uncomfortable silence that followed. Your Majesty, could I go with the troop of minor scouts? The king shook his head. Young Errolson, you've risked your life enough today. But sire, Aiden insisted, don't you think someone small should be in the party? Harlan chimed in. There's so many tight spots in a cave. And the miners I know, added Aiden, are pretty broad about the chests and shoulders. The king thought on this. You might be right, Errolson. The minor scouts might need someone who has the body of a boy, but the wits of a man.